have a small voice. Can everybody hear me? If you can, I guess just say louder. Just interrupt me so that you don't come up to me afterward and say, I couldn't hear words you said. Or come closer, maybe switch places. Dan and I were in San Antonio yesterday, and we were speaking to a crowd of both freethinkers and Americans United. So we were told to speak mostly about separation of church and state, to stay on ground that we were all in agreement with. But I guess I can really let my hair down here. How many people here are members of FFRF? So lots of you are familiar with what we do, so I'll talk a little bit less about that. But I do have a few notes. And I was calling this speech, Why FFRF is Suing Your Governor, or Why Do Texas Governors Hate FFRF? And Dan said that I should call it Do Mess with Texas. So I'll tell you why we're messing with Texas. Thursday, maybe you saw that in Oklahoma, the legislature passed a ridiculous bill to make it a felony for doctors to perform abortions. Probably all saw that, and when we left on Friday on the plane, I was working on an action alert to send to our members in Oklahoma, and we're very glad that even that anti-abortion governor saw the light and vetoed that bill, particularly pernicious bill. But it reminded me that the Freedom from Religion Foundation actually got our start because of the abortion rights battle. It could have been something else that opened my mother's eyes and my eyes to the harm of religion and government. But in our case, it was the battle to legalize abortion and contraception in Wisconsin, where contraception is still called an indecent article into 1974. So that's what happened to open our eyes. We felt that it was very clear that the organized opposition to reproductive rights for women, the only organized opposition was religious, in that it was predicated on religious notions such as that life begins at conception with ensoulment. So we felt it was imperative that dogma should never be enshrined in our secular law. And that's what turned my mother into what was really a feminist activist, into a free-thinking activist and for separation of state and church. And I was a junior high school kid following her around the state of Wisconsin as she advocated for legal abortion, and into high school, and I saw the same problem. But and so I do want to say that I want to introduce somebody who also cares very deeply about abortion rights issue, and that is Brian Bolton. Brian, Professor Bolton, you want to stand up? Brian is Professor Emeritus from Arkansas, who's settled near here, and very helpful in our building expansion in Madison, Wisconsin, and also underwrites our graduate essay competitions. And last fall, he called me up and said, I would like to run some full-page ads in the Bible Belt asking what does the Bible really say about abortion, and I would like to dedicate it in memory of your mother, Laurie Gaylor, who died last year. So I don't know if you saw the ad that ran here in Austin Statesman Review in March, and then we've been running it in Wichita last Sunday and Tulsa. And so I'm going to take a little credit that Governor Fallon vetoed that bill because she must have read our ad, showing that the Bible really isn't strictly anti-abortion and, of course, should not be part of our laws. So, as I said, we don't have unanimity among our membership on all issues, all social issues, but it did open our eyes to the harm of religion and government. But what started FFRF in 1976 was our realization that in Madison, Wisconsin, the city council was beginning with prayer. And not just any prayer, they were inviting Christian clergymen in, and sometimes even at the subcommittee meetings, which my mother and I had had reason to go to, and we thought that we should go in and complain, and that it would seem a little weak. At that point, I was a college student, and she was a full-time feminist activist. A little weak to go in as a mother-daughter team, so we should call ourselves something. And we have been bandying about this idea that there is no freedom of religion without freedom from religion. This is a big myth or big misunderstanding by the public about the First Amendment, that there's no religious liberty without the freedom to dissent. So we liked that term, freedom from religion. Of and from really mean the same thing. So we thought, let's call ourselves the Freedom from Religion and to make it a alliterative foundation. And it got front page coverage, and it took a year, but we did prevail. We stopped prayer. They haven't prayed since then. Madison doesn't have a prayer. And many people contacted us and wanted to join us, and the rest, as they say, is history. And of course, we are still dealing with the subject of governmental prayer big time. We have Nothing Feels Like Prayer contest, encouraging you, if you live in a city or county where they are praying, to ask to give secular invocation, to challenge the Greece decision by the Supreme Court a couple of years ago that unfortunately said your government can open with sectarian prayers, largely Christian prayers, with the proviso that they should allow somebody from any religion or even atheists. So we have a Nothing Feels Like Prayer contest where you get an all-expense-paid trip to our convention and your secular invocation. So we have continued to fight these same battles. The abortion rights battle doesn't go away. We're waiting for the decision with the whole Women's Health Center here in Texas. It will probably be a non-decision by the Supreme Court. We have many of the same issues in Wisconsin, which I call the Texas of the North. And I mentioned that to my host in San Antonio, Deb, and she said, that's not a compliment. And I said, no, it's not meant to be a compliment to either state. We both have these very bad issues, but we persevere. So FFRF started with just the two of us, and actually then a third gentleman joined, my mother and myself. And we have two purposes. We work to keep religion out of government, as is dictated by our Constitution, and we work to educate the public about non-theism. So today we have grown to what we believe is the largest free thought association of atheists and agnostics, 23,500, and growing. And we really appreciate your membership and support, and makes us speak with a much more colorful voice. And we have grown very dramatically in the last few years to the point where, we had a much-needed building expansion in downtown Madison and added a 5-story addition so we could house our 5 staff attorneys and our 2 legal fellows and our many legal interns who are doing dramatically important work in keeping religion out of government. And last year we had over 5,000 queries from members of the public, from our members and others, asking for advice on ending state church violations. Our attorneys wrote over 1,200 letters of complaint, formal letters, not including the follow-ups. We ended over 250 violations, including major violations like getting crosses taken down off public property, ending prayer in school. And we have about a dozen lawsuits going on at any particular time. We won 5 lawsuits last year, including removing a 2,000-ton Ten Commandments monument, 6 foot tall, that was parked in front of a junior high school for 50 years, the Eagles Monument. And we had to go to court, and we went to federal court and we won, and it got removed in October. We ended kindergarten prayers in Georgia school. We had to go to court, even though the precedent by the Supreme Court is very clear that you can't pray in schools, you can't corral the kids and indoctrinate them and proselytize them. But we had a complaint from a family in Georgia. I could talk a little fast. Can you hear me? A family in Georgia that they had a kindergartner and they had a first grader, and they were being told to pray before they went to lunch. And it was a devout, God is good, God is great, thank you for the food we eat on men kind of prayer. And the parents had complained, and the school said nobody has ever complained, and so we're not going to stop. And so we wrote a backup letter. And so what do you think they decided to do to solve this problem? They kept praying, and they said the kids can go outside the classroom during prayer. Yes, a kindergartner and a first grader. And the first grade teacher told the first grader that her mother was a bad person because she didn't believe in God. The gym teacher was even going after this little girl. The kindergartner was so traumatized that he wouldn't go to school, and the mother had to homeschool him. And actually, after we won that lawsuit, they left town. It was in Manuel County, Georgia. So we think our work is very, very important in mopping up Supreme Court cases, or hopefully in creating new precedent. And since I can talk about my atheism in this gathering, I'm a third-generation freethinker on my mother's side of the family. My parents felt that it's very wrong to inflict dogma and abstractions on small children before they have the ability to evaluate the veracity of the claims, or even to understand what on earth you're talking about. So I didn't grow up with any fear of hell. I didn't have any religious guilt tripping. I like to say that I was like a secular Pippa, if you know the Robert Browning poem. God wasn't in his heaven and all was right with my world. But I was born in the 50s of the McCarthy era, thanks to one of our senators in Wisconsin. And a number of very serious violations that we know about were passed in Congress. And I feel that I have spent the better part of my life working to try to undo those violations from the 1950s. And it's an uphill battle, and it requires perseverance and education, because the religious right just doesn't give up, and we can't give up either. And just to summarize, in 1952, Billy Graham went to Congress and said he held some soul-winning revivals on the steps of the Capitol, and he said he wanted to see the nation's leaders on their knees to Jesus. And he suggested having a National Day of Prayer. So almost overnight, Congress passed a law requiring the president to give an annual proclamation of prayer to beseech us, we citizens, to get together in churches and in communities and pray to God. And ever since that 52 legislation, all presidents have issued proclamations, and they're not just proclamations to pray, but they are proclamations with laundry lists telling you what to pray about. And we felt that was very wrong. We get so many complaints around the National Day of Prayer, which is now the first Thursday in May, that we went to court, and you may remember we had a very dramatic victory in 2010 with the federal court ruling in our favor that it was more appropriate for Congress to issue a National Day of Prayer than it would be to issue a National Day of Blasphemy. And to say, to tell people to go to get together and pray in churches would be like saying they should engage in voodoo magic, or that they should get together in a sweat lodge. All of these things, Judge Crabb said, are equally inappropriate. And what's also interesting is that law is based on bad history. It's put into the congressional record that they prayed during the Constitutional Convention. And I think you know, with me, they did not pray. It was 4 months long, acrimonious, and they never prayed. And when Benjamin Franklin suggested praying, they adjourned for the day. So that's why it's so important to always correct the disinformation and lies of the religious right. So at least we corrected that record. When the case was appealed to the Seventh Circuit, it threw us out on standing, which was very wrong because we never fought harder. We showed how often we had gotten complaints and all the trouble we had to go to try to deal with this unconstitutional law that has created a whole level of cottage industry governmental breakfast, prayer breakfast, and mayor's breakfast. But with the Supreme Court being the way it was, we did not appeal that ruling. In 54, of course, you know, under God was put into the previously secular pledge, dividing what was previously an indivisible country, one nation, indivisible with liberty and justice for all, by inserting God in it. And some of you are old enough to have learned the pledge the right way, and probably still have trouble saying it the wrong way. And we get so many complaints from students who are being penalized when they complain about the Pledge of Allegiance. And of course, in 54, Congress decided to reward ministers of the gospel with what it called a housing allowance, to reward them for fighting godlessness. And this is in the record. If a church pays part of their salary as a housing allowance, they can subtract that part of their salary from their taxable income. And so we are busy fighting that, and Dan will say a little bit more about that in court. And in 55, Congress said, "In God We Trust" has to appear on all the money. It had started getting on the coins at the very end of the Civil War when a minister wrote the Minister of War and said that we need to fight the ignominy of heathenism. And it ended up on, I think it was I forget if it was a quarter or 50-cent piece, and it gradually got on the coins, but it was not on the dollar bills. And in 55, Congress said they had to be on all the dollar bills. And you know, previously, distinguished committee, Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and Thomas Jefferson had chosen the motto E pluribus unum, from many come one. And kind of celebrating the state-federal form of government, totally secular, and supplanted by a motto that isn't even accurate. In order for it to be accurate, "In God We Trust" would have to be "In God Some of Us Trust." And that would be a pretty silly motto. So we have been fighting that. And then, of course, it didn't get on the money until late 57 because they had to wait for the dies to be changed. But every year, if you come to a Freedom from Religion Foundation convention, we hold a very popular drawing for clean, free and God we trust money. And it's a good way to prove, to win an argument when you're dealing with fundies who say God has always been part of our money and part of our country. And we have 1s, 2s, 5s, 10, 20, 50, and $100 bill that you have a chance to win. And by the way, our national convention will be in Pittsburgh this year, and in early October. And we have Banya Ahmad, who survived the attack that killed her husband last year in Bangladesh. And he was macheted on the streets as an atheist, and there have been 6 attacks, killing since then of atheist bloggers, and also some gays and some professors. And right now, FFRF, this is a digression, but right now FFRF is busy. I've been very busy spending my time trying to wire money to 7 Bangladesh bloggers so that we can get them out of the country. We have a hit list of 300, and we're working with people who I have advocated for the rights of Taqi Nazrin, who was the first Bangladesh atheist to be put on a hit list back in 1994 and is not allowed back in the country. And so anyway, things could be worse, but we feel that this incursion of God on our currency and our money, tampering with our secular and godless constitution, is very dangerous. It takes you down the route to theocracy, and you can see what happens when religion is in charge. Ruth Green, who's one of our early authors at FFRF, who wrote The Born-Again Skeptic's Guide to the Bible, said religion once ruled the world. It was known as the Dark Ages. And we have a bunch of stick items here, but so we do think this work for secular government is absolutely vital. We see what happens all around the world when we do not have it. And then in 1956, I guess the motto, "In God We Trust" was chosen as the motto, they said. So we have a new campaign at FFRF to educate Congress, which may be inadequate, to send our very bright young attorneys who deal in the trenches every day with state church issues, who know the law, which is really pretty simple, to send them to Congress every year, periodically, to lay the groundwork to repeal some of these very bad laws from the 50s and make sure they don't pass new ones. And among the laws that we are in favor of is the Do No Harm law that was just introduced this week by Joe Kennedy and Bobby Scott of Virginia, who's a wonderful advocate for separation of church and state. And this is to amend the Religious Freedom Restoration Act that the Hobby Lobby ruling was predicated on, that if you're religious, you don't have to obey the law. That if you're offended, then the Civil Rights Act doesn't have to apply. If you're a business, you can discriminate against gays, or if you're Hobby Lobby, you don't have to allow your women employees to choose their own contraception and say, I don't want you to do the pill, which is what the Supreme Court decision basically allows them to do with the Hobby Lobby ruling. So anyway, we're going to try to educate Congress And, of course, they haven't caught up with the changing demographics that you probably know of. That 24% of adults today identify as non-religious, and 30% of millennials, which is major. But, we have to pinch ourselves as atheists and agnostics to know that we exist in an election year. Nobody's courting our vote. Have you ever had a politician court your vote as an atheist? We're not exactly considered a special interest group to be catered to. So we have started an I'm Secular and I Vote campaign, and we have an ad campaign going using millennials, and we have ads going up in Washington, D.C. during the Reason Rally, and Dan and I will be there. Some of you are going to the Reason Rally, June 4th, any of you? No. Anyway, we're trying to get the eye of politicians, and most freethinkers are registered voters, and I suspect, is anybody in this room not a registered voter? We are really a good group to move because we care, we watch, we vote. And so our election year campaign isn't so much about getting our members to vote as it is getting politicians to court us, to pay attention to us, to acknowledge us, and our issues, which are primarily state church related. And FFRF did a survey of 8,000 registered non-believers, and the top of the list, abortion rights, gay rights, our members and voters care about civil rights for everybody. And they care about climate change and these things, that nobody's catering to our group, and they should. So I wanted to briefly talk about Texas. I guess I'm running out of time. I have a handful of press releases dated since February of all the many things that the Freedom from Religion Foundation has done here in Texas to keep religion out of government. Just to give you an idea, before I talk about the biggie, we've stopped religious ceremonies in graduations. We got a judge sanctioned for saying that a guy who was committed of a misdemeanor had to write Bible verses down. We got a biblical patch removed. This was April. Matthew 5:9. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called the children of God. And that was on the Diboll County. There's a picture of it. We got them to take it. It's going to come off the patch. These things are very major. When you have a law enforcement officer wearing a Bible verse, a New Testament verse, that sends a message of theocracy. Let's see. We got a Bible quote removed from a school district homepage, and that was Troop Independent School. We importantly got a Texas judge sanctioned. We blocked preaching at a mandatory employee event in Hearst Euless Bedford Independent School District. Preachers were sermonizing during compulsory employee events. You name it, it happens in Texas. Of course, Bible distribution, which is a perpetual problem with the Gideons coming into the schools and preying on a captive audience of fifth graders. But I just want to end by telling you about two other cases that we're involved in. So, this is out of order. In February, we got a complaint from two of our two non-believers. One is an atheist and one is an agnostic. In Brewster County, Texas, which is, I guess...
That's where I'm from.
You're from.
That's when I sent my I sent another 100 books to you guys.
So,
crucifix. On a car.
The sheriff's putting Latin crosses on the 5 patrol cars.
This is the only time in the United States is that the only one you've seen on the car?
Well, it's the only one we know of.
Oh, really?
It's just, if you know about it someplace else, you gotta let us know. And so we wrote a letter, and so guess who decided to interfere after we got publicity complaining about this? Your governor, Greg Abbott. And so he submitted a legal memo to guess who? Your state attorney general. Ken Paxton, saying this is perfectly legal. So I want to tell you that on March 2nd, I think it was, yes, we were very happy with the help of our two very important local plaintiffs to file a federal lawsuit in Brewster County, Texas. And I think it was within a week, guess what happened? The crosses are done. Now we're still in the settlement. It isn't formal yet, but they're saying they will never put them back up again. So take that, your governor at it. And you probably know that we had a complaint here in Austin, I guess it was 2 years ago, when a nativity scene was placed in your state capitol. Any of you might have been one of the complainants. And so Sam Grover, who's one of our staff attorneys, and actually he's the guy that has won all these victories for us because Texas is his state. He worked very hard and he got a permit for us to put up our own display. And we had to jump through the hurdle of finding a state legislator who would sponsor our display. And I thought that would never happen in Texas. Do you know who helped us? Donna Howard. And that was very kind of him. And so it was left to me to come up with an idea for this display. And this is a problem because in public forums, if the government allows a nativity scene to go up at Christmas, and then they say it's a public forum, then they say anybody else can put up a display. But we run into a lot of problems where they say, well, you're putting up a banner with a bunch of words, and this is an image. And so we've been working really hard to find an image to counter the Christian nativity. And so a young man who's an artist came up with a really cute idea of a Bill of Rights nativity. And you've probably seen the picture if you remember. But I'll tell you what it looks like. It's Benjamin Franklin and the Statue of Liberty and Thomas Jefferson, and we think it's George Washington kneeling beside a manger holding a Bill of Rights. They're gazing adoringly at the Bill of Rights, which was adopted on December 15, 1791, which is very conveniently close to the winter solstice. And then we have a sign next to it tying it all together. And as you may know, this was up for about 2 days when Governor Abbott removed it, even though we had a permit. So we have filed a lawsuit against him. And his messing with us goes way back because you may know about the Prince cheerleader case that we got involved in where the cheerleaders paint terrible Bible verses. What do they say, Dan?
I can do all things through Christ.
I can do all things through Christ. And then the football players have to run through the paper banners to start the football game at their high school. And when we complained, the school stopped it, and then the cheerleaders sued the school, and that's been going on forever. And at that time, Governor Perry and Attorney General Abbott had a press conference going after the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And then they've done it since then. They told us to stay out of Texas. Our message to the atheists is, don't mess with Texas, or our nativity scenes, or the Ten Commandments. And again, in 2012, Abbott attacked us. He said, we will not allow atheist groups from outside of the state of Texas to come into the state to use menacing and misleading intimidation tactics to try to bully schools to bow down to the altar of secular beliefs. And then I think one more thing that Carrie said, let's see. Oh, so then he assailed us, of course, after the Brewster County Sheriff's Office. And he's basically evinced a pattern of hostility toward atheists and agnostics and toward the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So that's part of our lawsuit. And we do expect to prevail with that lawsuit. And, well, in conclusion, I'd like to leave people with 3 ideas. If you encounter a violation of the separation of church and state, or discrimination against you as a non-believer, make a fuss, if you can. And if you can't, come to us, or come to us for backup, and we'd be very glad to do something about it if we can. And if you're a non-believer, and you can do so, come out of the closet. One of the reasons that we have so little political power is that we are one of the most marginalized populations in the United States. A survey from 2006, a longitudinal survey by the University of Minnesota, examined outsider groups, atheists, gays, women, African Americans, Muslims, Arabs. And from the 1960s and to the present, And they said every single outsider group had made great gains in social acceptance except for one group. And I'll give you one guess. That's us, atheists. And people would say things like, they're prostitutes, they're thieves, they're in prison, they're the person we would least like our son or daughter to marry. And when we interviewed Penny Edgell on our radio show, Free Thought Radio, and I said, where do these crazy ideas come from? She said many people in the American public have never knowingly met another atheist. And I think free thinkers are the best advertisement for us. And finally, never let a myth such as Christian nation, Judeo-Christian nation, our country was founded on God, go uncorrected, whether it's you're writing a letter to the editor, whether it's in conversation with a colleague, if you can use social media, because these are very pernicious lies that are believed by significant numbers of the population, including a significant number of public officials, and leading to many very serious violations, such as the National Day of Prayer. So, thank you very much for your activism, attending, and now, thanks.
To take one question.
Oh, just one question.
I have a question. Where do you get the old paper money that doesn't have "In God We Trust" on it?
Well, you can usually get it from current coin dealers. They'll keep an eye for us. We ask our bank to keep an eye out for us, and the any-kind members will, once every month or so, someone will send in a donated money, or sometimes people who win the money will donate it back. So right now we have pretty good supply.
Here's Dan.
Thank you, Annie Laurie. We are married. We're having our 29th anniversary this month. It's on the 30th, and we might make it to the 30th. We met in 1984 on Oprah Winfrey Show, and you might have seen that clip on YouTube of me with a lot of hair, Annie Laurie fighting with the fundamentalists. It's really fun. Look it up if you can. Oprah, Laurie Gaylor, 1984. And I became a member that year of the foundation and started working in 1987. I'm a newcomer. Annie Laurie and her mom were way back in the 70s, 60s, even before working for these things. I used to be a preacher. I used to be an evangelical, born-again, soul-winning preacher who eventually saw the light. And in 2004, Annie Laurie and I were elected co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. And as Annie Laurie likes to say, there's nothing more fun than suing the government. Or more fun than suing the government and winning. So we win a lot of cases, and the cases that we don't win are most often lost not on the merits, but on standing, if you understand legal. In fact, we've won some cases where the court said we were right, but the appeals court overturned it, saying you don't even have the right to sue. We even tried to sue over "In God We Trust" on the money. And can you imagine why the judge would say we can't sue over "In God We Trust" on the money? Can you imagine what argument would the judge say?
It's meaningless now. It's a secular phrase.
Basically, that's right. The judge says you can't sue over "In God We Trust" because "In God We Trust" is not a religious phrase. Of course, anytime we complain about state-church separation, what do? They pull out their dollar bill and they say, why can't we pray before city council? There's God on our money, right? So if it's such a trivial little phrase, if it really were a trivial little phrase, they shouldn't miss it if it were gone, right? Of course, they would miss it. It's like a stamp. It's their way of saying our views are the right views. So I was doing a radio show 8 or 10 or 12 days ago about this new lawsuit where we are suing Congress. I'm suing Congress over the chaplaincy. And some Christian caller called into the show and said, yes, but America's a Christian nation and our founding fathers and the Declaration, you've all heard that stuff, right? And so I responded, about, we have a godless constitution. There was no prayer at the Constitutional Convention. the declaration was really deistic and not Christian. And so I just responded with it. And at the end of my comments, the caller said, well, I asked you a question, and you just responded with facts. And then he hung up. Well, excuse me, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. We get that a lot. So to cut it really short, because we don't have much time. Both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House of Representatives, have an official chaplain who has one codified duty, that is to open each session with a prayer. That's all they have. The chaplain of the House of Representatives, Patrick Conroy, who's a Jesuit Catholic, is paid $172,500 a year to do that one thing. He has 2 full-time staff members. If you add up his salary and his staff with the Senate, it's almost $800,000 a year that we are paying to open sessions with a prayer that no one comes to, except the representative who invited. The chaplain opens the sessions, but can invite guest chaplains in also. So about twice a week, 2 out of the 5 are guest chaplains. For example, when Senator Feingold from Wisconsin became a senator, he immediately invited his sister, who's a rabbi, to come into Congress to open the Senate with a prayer. And so the chaplain has to vet and okay who gets to come in and be a guest chaplain. So I'm an ordained minister, and I've been using my ordination for years to perform secular weddings, atheist weddings all over the country. I was ordained in California, and the state doesn't care what your views are. The state's not in the business of deciding who has the proper theological views and who doesn't. Once ordained, always ordained. And the state of Minnesota has accepted me, the state of Wisconsin. I've performed weddings all over the country as a secular celebrant using my ordination. In fact, I performed a secular wedding at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs for one of the officers. I was vetted by the chaplain there and allowed to perform this ceremony. So why shouldn't I, an atheist, be permitted the opportunity to participate in my own government to solemnize this very important work that Congress is doing? Why shouldn't I be allowed to come in and say, I would like to also open with a secular invocation, not a prayer? So a couple of years ago, just right after the Greece decision, if you know that, Greece versus Galloway versus town of Greece, the Supreme Court made a really bad decision, but it's the decision of the land now, that said city councils, legislatures can have prayer, even sectarian prayer to Jesus, as long as they are not discriminating, as long as it's open to anyone. And so in the town of Greece, it was mostly Christian, and in the U.S. House of Representatives, it's about 96% have been Christian. And if you consider Abrahamic religion, it's more than 99%. So in the town of Greece, they had to invite other non-Christians in. And in fact, Dan Courtney, an atheist, opened with prayer at that very town of Greece, and the sky did not fall. I mean, atheists can participate. We're citizens too. This is our country, right? So our attorneys were in Washington, D.C. 2 years ago, and they dropped in on the office of the chaplain of the House of Representatives. And the 2 women there's these pictures of the Pope on the wall. In our Capitol, in one of the offices, there's the Pope, and they're Catholic. And they brought up the suggestion, why couldn't Dan, who's co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, come into Congress and open one of the sessions with a secular invocation, not a prayer, because I don't believe in a higher power. And they said, well, and we kind of think, there's no written rules, by the way. We kind of think they were just kind of pulling these rules out of who knows where. They said, well, he has to be ordained. He has to be invited by a member of Congress, because the chaplain's there at the pleasure of the members of Congress, right? We don't have a right to just go in and do it, right? We're invited by Feingold or somebody. And he must not address the members of the House. He must address a higher power. That's the rule. Well, we easily met the first 2 because my representative in Madison, Mark Pocan, who's a wonderful guy, in fact, he had a fight to allow his husband, he's gay, to be admitted into the House as a spouse rather than as a designee. They used to have gay partners come in as designees, and he said, "How romantic is that? Here's my designee." So he fought and he won that. I don't know what Mark Pocan's religious views are. It doesn't matter. We do know that he does believe in liberty and justice for all, and he cares. And he recognizes and respects the fact that the Freedom from Religion Foundation is an established organization in his district. So he asked the chaplain, this Patrick Conroy, to have me come in and deliver a guest invocation. How about addressing a higher power? The chaplain did not require it, but our congressman said, would it help you to see a draft of Dan's remarks? And you might say, so put your mind at ease. He's not going to be some flaming atheist up there bashing religion. I'm going to come in and bash the whole session. So I wrote a draft remark that we sent to him, and he looked at it. And then then we didn't hear from him for many, many, many months. And finally, Mark asked him again, well, what's going on with this? And he said, I didn't know they were serious. I didn't know they were serious. It's like, as if this would just go away if you ignore it. And he said, no, they are serious. I mean, this really is a serious request. And I'm a member of the House, and I'm asking you to do this. And in December, he finally told Mark, no, I can't allow this. It's a prayer. A prayer has to address a real higher power. My draft remarks said that in the United States of America, there is no higher power than we the people. We the people are the higher power in this country. And that I was planning to say, and I'm hoping to say, if we win this lawsuit, that I cannot address some supernatural spirits, but I can address the spirit, in quotes, the spirit of Thomas Jefferson and the spirit of Thomas Paine, who put common sense over dogma. Things like that would unite us and allow us atheists to participate, just like anyone else, in solemnizing a very important work. In January, the attorney for the chaplain wrote us a letter officially turning me down, because saying that although I was ordained in the Christian religion, I am no longer practicing in the religion in which I was ordained. Therefore, I am not qualified to use that ordination to get into performance. Well, our attorneys, Sam and Andrew, did a lot of work, and they found out a whole bunch of people have been guest chaplains who were not ordained. In fact, some religions don't even have ordinations. Imams don't have ordination. And some of them, in fact, were practicing in religions other than the one they were ordained in. So these rules, these unwritten rules, were just a way to try to keep me out of it. And so Mark said, don't sue yet. He even told the chaplain, he said, you're going to get sued over this. And the chaplain said, yeah, I guess so, right? And so he said, we kept saying, should we sue? Should we sue? And Mark said, let me give him one more chance. So very early May, Mark went back to the chaplain and tried one more time. Look, can we make this happen? We don't want a lawsuit, do we? And the chaplain didn't budge. He said no. So on May the 5th, which all of you know was the National Day of Prayer, we sued Congress on the National Day of Prayer, claiming that my rights were violated under equal protection under the Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution. No religious test shall be required for public office. That's in the Constitution, right? The chaplain is an officer of the House. He is a public office, and the guest chaplains are therefore a public office. And yet a religious test is being imposed on me to participate in a public office under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and also the Establishment Clause of the U.S. Constitution. So that was just filed, and I think we're about ready to serve them. It was filed May the 5th, and we'll see what happens. Try to imagine what arguments the government will come up with to say atheists are not allowed. This goes way back. Ernestine Rose was an early feminist leader who was also an outspoken atheist in the mid-1800s. And she gave a speech about the virtue of atheism. What was the name of her speech? The value of atheism? Defense of atheism. And she was the first woman to actually go door-to-door canvassing for women's rights. They would not allow her to speak before Congress because she was an atheist. So there's no room at the end for atheists in Congress. We're going to see what happens with that lawsuit. We're also suing, as Andy already told you, over the housing allowance, ministers of the gospel. The IRS says ministers of the gospel don't have to include their housing as income. Wouldn't you love to do that on your taxes each year? Wouldn't you love to say, all my rent, or all my house payments, all my property taxes, any expenses for living are not income? It would lower your tax liability, and you you'd be thousands of dollars richer, which every clergy in the country and ministers of the gospel includes rabbis, priests, ministers, anyone who's ordained, gets that tax benefit, and the rest of us don't. We took that suit. Well, you have to be receiving part of your income designated as a housing allowance by your church. So we won the case actually a few years ago, but the appeals court, Obama's administration, challenged their loss, and the appeals court threw us out. You think they threw us out on the merits? They threw us out on standing. Even though we won it, and they didn't address whether or not it was right for the clergy to be considered a special class in a country where there is no higher power, they threw us out on standing, basically telling us what we need to do to get standing. So guess what? The Freedom from Religion Foundation has designated for Annie, Laurie, and me a housing allowance. We are in a nonprofit. Just like churches are nonprofits, we're a nonprofit. And so part of our salary, it didn't increase our salary, but it designated that this much of our salary was for a housing allowance. And we paid our taxes, but then we filed an amended tax return claiming a refund based on the housing allowance that clergy get, but that we don't. And we actually got 1 year back. Somebody actually refunded. Somebody thinks Laurie Gaylor is a minister of the gospel. Can you believe that? But for 2012, they denied us. They turned us down, saying, no, we can't. So now we have direct injury. Now we're back in court over that issue. So let's watch that. The outcome could be that clergy no longer get this special break, or it's possible the court could say, well, all nonprofits get it. In which case, we're going to ordain all of our attorneys. And if any of you work for a nonprofit, that would be way too messy. I mean, how would they even track that? I mean, the churches are already crossing the line with these loopholes. They're ordaining everybody, and even basketball coaches at Catholic high schools are claiming to be ministers of the gospel so they can get this special break. So we'll have to see what the court's going to do with this obviously hot potato that the appeals court didn't want to deal with by denying our standing. So we also work, besides legal at FFRF, we also work to educate the public about the views of non-believers. We publish books. Annie Laurie told you about Ruth Green's book, The Born Again Skeptics Guide to the Bible. Annie Laurie has a number of books. We were not allowed to bring books in here today because it's a library thing. Her book, Women Without Superstition, and World of the Women, and then there's one of my books, Godless. And the Foundation published my book, Losing Faith in Faith, From Preacher to Atheist, and then this came out in 2008. And I have a new book. Last year I came out with a book called Life-Driven Purpose, which some of you understand what that means, because Rick Warren, his book was A Purpose-Driven Life, which I think is top-down and wrong. I don't think life is top-down. I think life is bottom-up. So instead of purpose-driven life, we have life-driven purpose. But my most recent book is an accident, really. It was Richard Dawkins, the famous biologist. All of you know Richard Dawkins. His book, The God Delusion, which came out 10 years ago, he's been criticized for being angry and strident. These angry atheists, right? And if you've read The God Delusion, there's some passion in there, and there's some strong argument, but it's not a strident. You know what I mean? How they paint it, like, oh, you're angry. Except for one sentence. And even Dawkins admits there's one sentence that has raised eyebrows. It's the first sentence in chapter 2 of the... Did you bring your God Delusions? Turn with me. Turn with me to chapter 2, verse 1. And people have criticized him very hard for that. He says this sentence in public speeches. The chief rabbi of England called it anti-Semitic, that he would say such a thing. The sentence is this: the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. And people are shocked by that. And you know why they're shocked? Because they don't read the Bible. Most people don't read it. They don't know that stuff's in there. These 19 nasty adjectives that Dawkins listed in there. presidents put their hand on the Bible to swear to. Do they even know what's in it? It's in the drawers in your hotel room. Do these families know what's in these books that is in the hotel room? Do they even know? The infanticide and the genocide and all that. So Richard sent me an email saying, you know what, I've got to defend myself against this. So he was making a keynote diagram. Keynote is the Mac version of PowerPoint, and that's kind of like Protestants versus Catholics, I guess. It's like, fortunately, we both use Keynote, and it was a spider diagram with the sentence in the middle and then those 19 legs going out. So you can click on the leg that says ethnic cleanser, and then up comes the verse. You shall drive out all the inhabitants from the land, for I have given you the land to possess. Plus a bunch more verses. After a while, working on this back and forth, I came up with more than 1,500 passages to document those 19 verses. And Richard said, you know what? Instead of just a keynote, this would make a good book. Are you laughing because I said good book? And so one chapter for each of those adjectives. And so that's the origin of that book. And as I was working on it, I discovered that Richard had overlooked a few. He probably didn't overlook them. He probably thought, okay, 19 is enough, right? So part one of the book is called Dawkins Was Right, and I have a chapter for each of those with biblical documentation for every one of those. And part two of the book is Dawkins Was Too Kind. And it has pyromaniacal, angry, cannibalistic, aborticidal, slave monger, personal. It has some more of it. And of course, the final chapter, what are most Christians going to say? You can't judge the Bible by the Old Testament alone, right? So I have the final chapter, What About Jesus? In which I show that Jesus was not a chip off the old block. He was the old block itself. He even claimed it. I and the Father are one. And he took credit for it. And he proudly quoted those horrible genocidal passages. So that book came out in February of this year. I gave my first book fair over in Tucson in March. It's huge. Tucson is one of the biggest book festivals in the country. And as we were walking to the booth, I went by the Gideon Society. And we didn't want to bother them, but they came out onto the sidewalk, pushed Bibles to us. So you take a Bible, the best-selling book in all history. And I said, no thanks. We're headed to the Atheist booth. And he said, oh, I bet we could have a theological discussion, couldn't we? And I said, yeah, I bet we could. But anyway, I came back later to get some ice cream, and here they come, pushing the Bible out. You should read the Bible. It's the best-selling book ever read. And I said, yeah, but it's also the least read book. People buy it, but no one reads it. Did you see the news last week? From Goodreads, they surveyed what is the best, their favorite book in all history. The Bible came in number 2. Did you see that story? You know what came in number 1? The Complete Calvin and Hobbes. Isn't that great? Anyway, you know, and so I stopped this time and I asked the guy, I said, have you actually read the Bible? And he said, oh yeah, we're the Gideon Society, right? The Gideons that are in all these books. And I said, really? So, well then maybe you can explain to me, what do you think about the story of Pinehas? The story of Pinehas, it's an important biblical story. It's in the Bible that you've read. Well, I haven't memorized the whole thing. I said, well, okay, then what do you think about the story of Korah and Korah's rebellion? I mean, that horrible. What do you think about that story? And I asked him story after story that's in this book, and he didn't know. He hadn't actually read it. I think these believers are like, you know, like when you're installing new software or new app on your device, the terms and conditions. Do you read them? Or do you scroll down to the bottom and just hit accept? All right. So I think most people do that with the Bible. They don't actually know what's in it. They don't read it. So Richard Dawkins and I, and I'm sure many of you, we are begging people, please read the Bible. A.A. Milne, who wrote Winnie the Pooh, he said he thinks the Bible is responsible for more atheism than any other literature ever written. The Old Testament, he said. And Isaac Asimov said, properly read, the Bible is the most potent force for atheism ever conceived. If people would just read it, that 4% of our members, we surveyed our members and more than 8,000 people responded. Maybe some of you did too, about all sorts of things. And why did you become a non-believer? 4% put down Bible reading as the main reason why they became a non-believer. They actually read what it said and went, ooh. So Pinchas, I don't have any more time, do I? Pinchas was the high priest, the grandson of the high priest Aaron. God had told the Israelites, don't mix with the Midianites. Don't marry with them. Don't get involved with the Midianites. But one guy, one Israelite, brought in and married a Midianite woman. And he brought her into his tent. Their name was Cosby and Zimri. And so Pinchas, under this authority of God, went in with a sword and he stabbed both of them through the belly and he killed both of them. What do you think happened to Pinchas for doing that?
Round of applause.
Yeah, more than a round of applause. God praised Pinchas for keeping the nation pure. Suppose that happened in this country. Suppose some righteous minister or somebody was here's a mixed marriage, right? We can't have that. We're going to kill these people. That would be a hate crime of the highest order, wouldn't it? They'd live their life out in prison.
Not that.
Not in Texas, right? So, and Pinchas was rewarded with a perpetual priesthood. So I told the story to these Gideon's guy, and I said, so do you think Pinchas was a good man? Do you think he should have been rewarded? They didn't say anything. They just said, let me ask you a question. I said, okay, I'll answer your question, but first answer mine. Let me ask you a question. So finally I left. They don't read it. They don't know what's in it. I think people should read it. I know you have better things to do in your time, but the book is called God, the Most Unpleasant Character in All Fiction. It just came out as an audiobook 3 or 4 weeks ago. We're going to have a drawing. Right now we're having a drawing for a free copy of Annie Laurie's book, Women Without Superstition, on our radio show, Free Thought Radio. If you listen to Free Thought Radio, you can enter the drawing to get a free signed copy by Annie Laurie. And then next month we're going to be giving away 5 free audiobooks of God, the Most Unpleasant Character. Richard Dawkins reads the foreword, I read the book, and Buzz Kemper, the famous voice talent, does the voice of God. You shall eat the fruit of the offspring that comes from between thy legs for my glory. You know, stuff like that you never thought was in the Bible. And when the Babylonians come and rape your women and lift up their skirts, I, the Lord, am lifting up your skirts. Taking credit for wartime rape. The God of the Bible, I was told to love it in the Bible. Anyway, I don't know if that's good bedtime reading, but I think the world would be better off if people knew more about what they claimed to believe in. So we're out of time, right?
Where's Free Thought Radio?
Free Thought Radio it's a radio show that's broadcast in Texas. It's only in Central Texas. It comes out of Texas A&M area.
College Station, believe it or not.
Where?
College Station.
College Station.
Brian Hutch, Texas A&M is very, very conservative. I cannot believe that y'all got chaos or whatever it is to broadcast.
Okay, but if you know any stations in this area that might benefit from a Free Thought, we would love to broadcast here.
Are you on XM at all?
You can get it, no, but you can get it as a podcast later.
Podcast from iTunes.
A few days later on iTunes or through a podcast. You can also hear it minus the commercials. You can get it. So look online for Free Thought Radio. There's another Free Thought Radio out of the East Coast that's just a 24-hour thing. So look for Free Thought Radio FFRF, and you can listen to the show. This week, we're going to interview Sean D. Carroll, the physicist, this next week. And then we're going to interview, is he a great-grandson of Ingersoll? Robert G. Ingersoll's great-grandson, who's a psychologist and a musician. So we have a lot of variety of things. Any other questions?
We need to hook up with Alex Jones here, don't we?